We are lighting the candle, a world that works. I'm Bill Carell, and I'm here with two of our three other folks. Ken will be on shortly, but I'm here with Lisa Sheehan and Jan Jeremias. And I do have to say, I've missed your faces. There's Ken right on cue. So it's been a few weeks since we got together, it seems like, with all of the Monday holidays and everything, plus some travel with some of us. Ken, welcome. Good to see you.
Hello, all.
So I was thinking today, there's a lot of really diverse news in the world. And we have, in my mind, we've always had war going on somewhere. But most of the lesser wars, if you will, I call them that because they don't get nightly and hourly coverage on the regular media. But there's been stuff going on in Africa and other parts of the world, right straight along. Here we are, and I'm just kind of wondering, in the conversation of our greater community and our culture, the two words that I think are up for renegotiating and re-understanding are probably trust and confidence. And I bring those two words up not necessarily as the topic, to define the words and the rest of it, but to more or less kind of talk about what kind of practical application and meaning does a trusting and confident way of being allow for in this world as it's being negotiated right now. And as we were getting ready to turn on here, I asked Lisa what she's got going on for her next outside the house thing, and she mentioned that she's going to go see a play. And do you want to elaborate on that just a little bit more, so I'm not paraphrasing your words? We'll use your words.
Well, I should probably look up. I was telling Bill that as life and synchronicities happen all the time. Like you start looking at one subject and it comes at you a million different ways. And psychedelics have been on my radar for some strange reason, or maybe it's not a strange reason, but I'm trying to find there it is, the description of the show, and it's called Emergence. But no, that's not it quite. But one of the descriptions was basically like it's kind of like psychedelics and a bunch of other things mixed in with it. So if I find it, I'll read other words, but that's kind of what I said to Bill before we started.
Well, several of us are children of the 60s and 70s. There was a period of time where LSD was not illegal, for example. Mm-hmm. And as a matter of fact, they'd have big signs in storefronts, where different places where you could purchase LSD. And I remember that as a kind of a small child, driving through Central City, Colorado, back in the 1960s. And I saw this sign that said LSD. And I asked my mother, I said, "What is that?" She said, "I don't know." So there was more. Yeah, go ahead.
So the description of it's called Emergence, and the description is a play, a dance, a musical, a monologue, a rock concert, a psychedelic trip, and all those are crossed off, and then it says, "Or is it?"
There you go. Yeah, Rorschach test. You'll see what you'll see, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'll let you know next week.
Well, it's kind of interesting because growing up, I spent a little bit of time looking into Timothy Leary, especially after the Moody Blues said he was dead. Of course, he had to beg to differ. And the neat part of it is he had college courses where they got together and they all took LSD together and had a guided trip. And of course, in an environment where there's not a lot of alcohol and other things going on, there aren't usually many bad trips. Of course, college was quite different than that, but the point is that the drugs were used primarily in the 40s and 50s, and they actually were tested on a lot of servicemen as they did in those days. And the whole idea was to find out whether it would be give access to mind control, or if it's something that they could put into a water source or something like that, and then be able to have some sort of sway over the people that were taking the drug. After that time, there were a lot of people, I think, that really spent some time living in that sort of a thing where taking LSD allowed you to see the world not necessarily just differently, but completely newly. And so when you talk about emergence, it wasn't a question of colors. It wasn't a question of, hallucinations and that sort of thing. It was called, what was my response to what I'm seeing and experiencing? And Jimi Hendrix was actually probably one of the high priests of LSD. And the reason that I think that it's quite interesting, because we've gone full circle to where it was legal. It was a misdemeanor drug during the early 70s when I was going to college. And then it became outright illegal, and or could only be prescribed by a doctor under certain circumstances. And there's another question that I have for you, because now it's not something they're going to enforce. If it happens to be illegal where you live, it's kind of like marijuana and other low level drugs these days. It's going to be, as long as it's clear you're not trying to sell, they don't care. And I got no problem with that whatsoever, because trying to police human behavior is really a bad idea. I think, unless, especially if there's no crime being committed and no victim and that sort of thing. But, do any of you know the difference between psychedelic and psychotropic?
No.
I don't either. That would be worth looking up, because I've heard of the drugs being referred to as psychotropics
Yeah.
and the experience being referred to as psychedelic. And I don't know if
Probably.
I'm correct about that.
No, they're calling it a renaissance right now. I mean, there's a whole bunch of there was a summit this whole past week with all
Yeah.
different people on it. And in fact, when I was in Chicago too, Richard Rohr was on the panel, and the whole panel was about psychedelics and their personal experiences with it and their belief in the properties of it, or the possibilities of it, I should say.
Yeah. I didn't do a lot of experimenting when I was in high school and college. A little bit of pot, actually, probably more than a little bit of pot. Um, I only did acid one time, and I happened to be on vacation up by myself up in Maine, and 18 years old, money in my pocket, my 1968, Bally Blue Thunderbird, and cruising around, and got hooked up with these kids up there. Wound up swimming at this old mill foundation and diving, like 18 to 20 feet off the top of this thing, like I knew what I was doing. And then it was really a neat experience. And I've noticed a couple of times when there were things that I took that I thought I might like too much, I had the self discipline to say, no, that was good. Don't need that in my life every day. And fortunately, that's been a pretty good way to go. So we're talking about trust and um, confidence, which I think some would say is similar to a psychedelic experience on some level, in terms of, again, what you think is true will remain being true to you, even in the face of absolutely irrefutable evidence to the contrary. And it just seems like people are putting you on when they go against the grain with whatever it is that they're saying that you don't believe in. And it's some things it's easy to to identify with and say, yeah, I can get that. But other ones, it's like, what are they smoking? I mean, there's just no way that could be true. So why not take a little time out now and again? Why not go and see if you can have new experiences imprinted on you? It's probably not going to be for me. The last time I did CBDs in Colorado. Janet and I got it for a birthday present. It was legal out there. We both went home and had 2 little chunks of white chocolate, went back to the hotel room, had a little bit of wine, and went to sleep.
I was more amazed by the people that, I mean, I didn't, I watched documentaries and all sorts of things and how it like help people with addiction and PTSD especially. I thought that was exciting.
Yeah.
Like really bad emotional and you know have a physical effect on people that can be countered with this kind of and in a safe setting too, not just
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes you need something powerful to interrupt,
right.
and to cause a shift. So were there experiences that they shared that would make a difference, or that you think might be worth storytelling for a moment?
Well, one of the documentaries was a following she was a heroin addict, but you wouldn't know her, you wouldn't guess her to be that.
Right.
And she so desperately did not want to be that. So to hear from her point of view that, and she was an only child, and her mother said, I know I was supposed to do tough love, but I put out the 30 grand to send her to rehab and all this other stuff. And, and then the solution was eventually to come off of something that was easier to come off of was to put her on morphine so that she could take this trip and try it because it was another level, but it was in a definite center for this kind of practice, and there was a whole bunch of pre psychological and set up for them to understand what was going to go through, and then your mindset, of course, was the other big factor. Like you
Yep.
had to be prepared to want something positive and for you. You had to, and then the post, to bring it back into to integrate it back into your life, kind of thing. And at the end, she's now a speaker and stuff like roaming the world, all after years and years and years of trying to get off it. I mean, it took her a couple of tries because she was lying, of course, to the people that were trying to help her.
Yes.
But it was amazing the turnaround. And like I said, you would never know her she looked like the girl down the street, the girl next door kind of thing. And to find out that she was a heroin addict and whatever she could get her hands on kind of thing. But to see the transformation was just it was hard to describe. I mean, I was almost crying. I was almost in that kind of space, like going through it with her, because it was
Mhm.
so with her. The whole thing was they never missed a beat, so they were with her the whole time, kind of thing, and it just showed every part of it. It was very interesting.
For sure. So the interesting thing that you said is that somebody's got to be willing and also have a belief that it will, in some way give them access to a possible way out. They've got to believe that it's possible. Don't have to
And
really believe that
yeah,
it'll work, but they have to believe that it's possible and may work for other people.
and when you said trust, I thought of that too because they obviously had to trust the people that were helping them
Yep.
and trust themselves to go through it. And that was the other aspect, was trust was so important in her whole life because she wanted to not be that way and she wanted to not have her mother go through that anymore, and she just couldn't not do it despite everything she tried in regular kinds of rehab kind of thing.
Yeah. It's very interesting that addictive personalities, the number one issue that they have is trust.
Hmm.
And the main reason for staying numb all the time is because they can't trust how things will go if they're not.
Hmm.
So we're all of a certain age here. Some of us are more certain than others. But over the years, what's been your experience with how all these conversations have come and gone? And I'm real interested that there's a renaissance happening here because I have heard of psychologists and psychiatrists having extremely powerful results with using LSD over the years. Not to the point where I can tell you any stories about it, but I'd love to hear yours.
Anne or Jan, have you ever had? Do you know people that have been going through it, or?
I For me, the psychedelics I know people working with are much more in like the mushroom area.
Yeah,
Right. And that's
And
what this would be.
Psilocybin, that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Mhm.
not in. So I recently went to um something, and one of the guys on the panel was heavy into it. I don't remember where he lived, somewhere I think on an island off Washington or something. And he's been very involved in, I guess, in speaking about it and everything. But it's not something I have any, and I don't really know anybody. I maybe one person who used it. Otherwise, I don't really know anybody who's ever taken advantage or turned to that as a modality.
yeah,
I know a couple people. It's mm, it's an interesting. I think one of the reasons for a renaissance would be our deeper understanding of neuroscience and
Mhm.
how the brain works, and genetic predispositions, so that you can even, I mean, they're able to now kind of get a better feel prior to giving you a drug, how you're going to respond to that drug based on your DNA. So I think that that's probably, made it something that can more effectively be used safely if there's enough trust in the experts whose job is to do that. And that's one of the biggest challenges. I just kept thinking about a guy I knew years ago who took steroids, but he didn't lift weights. So he just got bloated. And it was like, he didn't do the work, the hard work that allowed the drug to be effective. So as they become more available, unfortunately, the world we live in now, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to think that they know how to safely apply those drugs to themselves or
Mhm.
even worse to others. And then you're going to hear about all the negatives from it.
yeah,
And now you got to sort out, is it the tool that's bad, or is it the intent that's bad, or is it the process that's bad? And that'll turn into another whole debate, you know, most likely, because we just have an abundance of information that will, like Bill said, support whatever your bias is.
yeah.
If you believe it's bad, you'll be able to find plenty of, you know, uh, resources that will convince you you're right. If you believe it's the all and ever inclusive solution, you'll probably find plenty of resources that will determine that as well. So,
It's just interesting, the term good or bad, and that's the way we were raised, wasn't it? There are
Mhm.
some things that are good for you, and there's some things that are bad for you, and then you grow up and you go, well, other kids are doing it, and they don't seem to be dying. Well, it's different today. They are dying, okay, in massive numbers. So whatever the culture can do to allow people to choose a different way than the addiction that they're living through right now, and make it okay, and without stigma, without
Mhm.
loss of face. That trust comes from, I get what you're doing, and we both know it's not good for you. And at the same time, you don't have another way. Let's look at this together and see if we can, create a solution here. So I think that's a good thing, because LSD was in the bad list for a very, very long time. And quite frankly, of all the things that you can do to your body compared to fentanyl and a bunch of other things, you know, it's like aspirin, really. Not if you do a lot of it, but the point is that what you're saying, Ken, with the trust and the folks around to make sure things go well, and with a commitment to be good about it yourself. And if you think about, one of the neat things that happens, and I've been around AA for a long time because my mom, declared herself an alcoholic back in the 1970s. And so there were a lot of people around that I got to know really well. And what they did is they made a choice to have confidence in a higher power in a real personal way that altered their lives. That it was something that they could get up every day and say, I won't have this beer, or I won't buy this bottle, just for today. And what they were doing is they were trading, it could be called an addiction, because the more people talk about something and the more the people around them are talking about something, the more the good feel good endorphins and all the rest of that come from the agreement and the discussion, and kind of like edification and understanding. And it's a growing process again. And it's kind of interesting, because I think most people that I've talked to about addiction, I've spent a little bit of time in that area here in the town. They consider that people who have an addictive behavior have to replace it with another addiction. So, for instance, when people stop smoking, they tend to eat a lot more food. And it's not necessarily because they're hungry, but they got to put something in their mouth, you know? So, I think with that in mind, if you've got a way to interrupt a process so you can choose a whole new set of behaviors and not just replace one with another, I think it's pretty powerful.
Funny
Sounds
thing
good to
is, on the panels they were talking about, more than one person mentioned that Bill Wilson actually
Yeah.
dabbled in psychedelics and claimed that that's where he got the idea to have the basis of AA be a higher power.
Yep.
There was a bunch of people playing back then.
Well, there definitely is a possibility that you think you see God when you take LSD. So some people have reported those experiences. But it's just such an interesting, to use Ken's word, not just the thought that something old could become new in a very powerful and life-saving way. I think that's interesting. Was there any talk about how to get access, to how these folks are making it work in their lives? And are they just kind of like the new kids on the block and they're out sharing their personal experiences, or are there,
It's legal in many places in Canada.
Yep.
So some of them were Canadian doctors practicing. And then California, I guess, is trying, like California always does, to make it legal.
I think they're working with mushrooms, right? Isn't that their
Yeah,
deal?
and a lot of it was about psilocybin. So they had all different kinds of forms, but a lot of it was mushrooms.
Yeah. Yeah, peyote's kind of interesting too.
Yeah, the people that I talk to, it's being discussed as in a clinical setting, and I think all the time I ask clients, are you moving towards something, or are you moving away from something? And if you're trying to move away from something, then the odds are that you're not considering intention treatment. You're just thinking about escape, and that's going to be the tools probably not, you're going to use less trustworthy sources of where you get it from, and probably not safely know how to take it, and maybe you survived taking it, but did it really do any good? It's like, I remember talking with someone years ago who was going to a 3-day insight meditation retreat, and I was talking to them about the value of practicing in advance, and then continuing to practice after. Like, you don't just go away for 3 days and not talk and wander around a garden and get better. Like, you can go do that. And I was like, do you want a vacation from your life, or do you want an experience that can change your life? And I had, like, whatever they said was fine. It was just understanding that, so that how to approach, if you can help them, and how. So, and it's funny, I mean, Bill, you mentioned the fentanyl, and all I could think of was how, yes, that's, people die quickly from that, but millions and millions have died over the last 30 years from opioid addiction that was completely legal. And, large
Alcohol too.
companies have been sued massively for that. And the only
Yeah.
difference is it killed you slow, and caused so many more difficulties beyond the person taking it, and most of that was what? Moving away from pain, moving away from, whatever it is, they're trying to numb themselves to something. It wasn't treatment oriented, it wasn't wellness oriented or balance oriented. It was, you know, help me not feel, you know. So I think the psychedelics, it's the same thing for people that are looking to heal, to truly heal, to move towards wellness, resolve trauma, whatever it may be. And they're looking at it as a disciplined, informed process. I think they'll do extremely well with it.
Those are really the important words that somebody in the room has to know how the hell this goes.
Mhm.
And has the 1, 2, 3 to it, and knows how to steward the situation safely. But there's another aspect to fentanyl and other street drugs, because essentially most street drugs have fentanyl in them now. So people think they're buying one thing, but there's still fentanyl there. And in our family's case, this is the 4th anniversary of my nephew. He broke a tooth, and he was having a hell of a time dealing with the pain in his mouth, but he didn't want to take the time, nor did he have dental insurance to go and have it operated on. So it wasn't the first or second time, apparently, that he took what he took, and he didn't realize that it was fentanyl, or he did and he didn't care, and he thought he was superhuman. It wouldn't happen to him. I think that logic, that thing that we've all got going on there, which I think is really it's the worst display of the Dunning-Kruger effect. That it happens to other people, it won't happen to me. Unfortunately, it does, to the tune of 600 people a day. It's just really not funny. So to hear there's somebody else out there who could say maybe different way to look at medicine. And it's just a tragic cost to to our culture, to our country, to the world, really. Because you stop and think about all the people, when their voice is silent from that moment on, their future contribution is extinguished. No more flames being lit by that candle.
Right.
Which is kind of like why this is a little bit of a downer and a tough subject. But again, coming back to trust and confidence, these are skills that I think can be developed in people, where they have the opportunity to be able to judge things from a lot of different ways, as opposed to just one. Is it good or bad? The other one is it worth the risk? Knowing what can happen. And I always loved the way your mentor, John, talked about the 3 bullshit detectors that we have. So the head, the heart, and the gut. And those are the 3 things. If they're not lined up with each other, you ought to listen to one of them. Listen to the one who's telling you it's a bad idea. Get more information. When you can trust yourself, then you don't have to blindly trust other people or the system or anything else. You can start to make your own choices in the moment. And I, for one, would like to see more of those skills being developed across the country. And where they are being developed is really cool to watch.
What have you seen, Bill?
I saw a meme on Facebook that actually had me in tears. And I can't tell you what city it was in, but it was these 2 giant black guys that I think were either businessmen or successful athletes or all of the above, who went back into the inner city, and they put together what they called the Gentlemen's Club. And you can go Google this, and it's pretty cool. They basically dress these kids up in suits. They teach them how to shake hands, how to address each other, in a formal fashion. how to listen, fundamental skills, social skills that would not normally be there while they're trying to figure out how they get their next pair of Air Jordans. Nothing wrong with that. But what they're basically saying is we got to give these kids a little bit of something else that will get them further in life, because and the smiles on all of their faces. There's like 8 or 9 kids in the picture, and just the whole notion of 2 guys deciding that they're going to do this. I had to take a copy of it and send it over to my friend who I've been working with at the shelter for the last couple of years, and I said, this is exactly what I was talking to you about. What I think we could do in the inner city is to give these kids something bigger than themselves, and a sense of belonging, and a sense of really feeling like it's working. So I see that as kind of a neat thing happening, and I'd like to see a lot more of it. Maybe there is a lot of it going on, and it just doesn't get talked about very much. So thank you for asking me.
How about you, Ken?
Yeah, there's there's definitely I think part of it is it takes time. Like there's certain models, because I just think about design and environment and how you have to create successful models that shift behavior and and attention, and that creates new opportunities for things that may be more beneficial. So like for example, there's a guy who runs a credit card company in Seattle. Think it might be called Gravity, but I'm not sure. But basically, he pays, quote unquote, overpays everyone in his company. I mean, they make like I think his minimum salary is 70,000 a year, no matter what you do there, and it goes up from there. And his pay is proportionate, not disproportionate. And he got bashed. I mean, every major news outlet, this company will fail. There's no way. He is thriving. This company is kicking butt and doing well. It's been like a decade now. So, so when you have someone who's willing to make the commitment and be successful at it, that starts to shift the narrative and expectations, and that was just a business example, but I mean, these 2 gentlemen Bill's talking about, if you can if you can give kids a taste of self-respect, which is really what it is, now you have to think about what are they going back to and how well will that hold up. So either their environment needs to shift to allow those seeds to actually germinate, or they need the internal strength and resources to be able to withstand an environment that doesn't accept it. So point being that all those things take time. So I think a lot of what we're seeing now is that. And it'll just be interesting how it all how it all evolves.
There's other examples like I don't know if anybody's heard of a guy named Pierre Dulaine. He created something called dancing classrooms, which is going into, I mean, he started, I think, in the Bronx, where he went in and taught 5th graders in the Bronx how to ballroom dance.
Mhm.
And then it snowballed, and now there are programs all over. He did a huge thing in the Middle East of like young Palestinian children dancing with Israeli children, and it was really like spectacular about teaching, respect and honoring space, and you know, and how to be a leader and how to be a follower without feeling compromised, or like, because if someone leads, you have to choose to follow, like, and everything. It was pretty amazing. I mean, I think they've taught like thousands and thousands of kids now.
Yeah, and I've always, well, I've always been partial to things where you can use movement as a metaphor for, like when we do martial arts techniques on a partner, I always call them conversations, so they're sending some energy towards you that might be a little aggressive. So how do you learn to handle that skillfully and appropriately, where you're protecting yourself, but you're also not over responding, or under responding? Where's the place of grace and balance? So,
Mhm.
and it's always interesting watching even adults reflecting on that and having it expressed physically, you know, with another person. So, But again, I've talked to fellow martial artists who scoff at it, because to them, someone tries to, if they bring energy towards you, you respond with overwhelming force, period. That is there. So if they have a different paradigm, and then others who are like, no, you don't ever raise your hand, no matter what they do to you. So, it's always interesting when you have these conversations. You've got individual perspectives and values that influence their views. So they're less concerned about the result that's being produced and more concerned about their thought process around whether you should be doing it that way. you know like, that's where you hear a lot of the arguments right now. It's not are these kids better off? It's, well, I don't think you should do it that way. It's like, but is
Mm.
it working? Is anyone getting hurt? Is anyone being helped? It doesn't matter. It's I don't think you should do it that way. Dancing is not for boys. I don't know. You know?
I remember, when I was teaching a lot in person, teaching a lot of yoga in person, we used to do a lot of partner yoga stuff. And it's an interesting thing where, where you have to balance with someone else based on their strength and your strength, and how you have to learn how to communicate with each other, because otherwise somebody ends up on their butt, like on the floor.
Yep.
If you don't have that communication of like, oh my gosh, you got to let up a little bit, or, give me a little space, or whatever it is. And it's a lot of fun, but it's a great tool for teaching how to communicate with other people and respond to whatever they're putting out.
Yeah, push hands is like that too with Tai Chi. And it's always so funny because if I have a group that's never done it before and I just tell them, here's how you do it, go ahead and try, they're trying to knock each other over, but then I change the metaphor, and I say you win by pulling silk. And I use the metaphor of, if you pull too hard, the thread snaps. If you pull too soft, it clumps. It's creating the right amount of tension. And then learning, if someone loses their balance, now you both figure out, you work to stress things so that you won't lose the balance next time. So all of a sudden it lightens, it's more fun, it's more interesting. The game is exactly the same. All you did was you invited them to take on a different view of what winning is in the game. So the result changed that they were trying to achieve, and their whole relationship to each other in the game changed. But once in a while you'd have a kid, especially a teenager, who in their world they have to win. There's fear, insecurity, or trauma, or whatever. So they don't care about silk. They care about knocking the other kid over, period. So it doesn't matter how skillfully you teach them, until you can help them recognize the view and the way where the result we're actually focused on. There's going to be a disconnect there.
Were you talking about the physical conversation triggered a memory of mine back before I met my wife, when I was working at EB. And there were five of us that used to run around. I was the smallest of the big guys, but the dangerous guy was only 5'7". He was a karate instructor, and he just was the quietest, most easygoing, whatever. And we'd go to bars over in Newport, or a couple of different places, and all of us would walk into the place. And of course, since we were all so big, somebody would take issue with something, playing pool, and somebody didn't like something, they'd come over, and I just remember one time standing at the bar, and the guy comes over and he taps Al, my buddy, who looked like Pete Rose. So you get an idea, he wasn't a small man. And he said, I don't like what you did. And I said, well, don't bother with Al. I said, because if you want to fight with one of us, you got all of us. Okay. But the first one you got to beat is this little guy right over here. And I said, that's an argument you're going to lose. We never had a punch thrown at us anywhere. Whether the guy was drunk or not, give him a hug, sit him down here. But the neat thing about knowing that you having all of this force that you don't have to use, easy to listen, easy to be forgiving, easy to understand somebody's had a few too many, nod to the bartender, and next thing you know, somebody's escorting them to the door, and there's no need to have, upset anybody's day.
That's why the first thing we do is we teach people to develop a sphere of protection, we call it. So how can you learn to skillfully keep your safe as is realistic, knowing that there's always going to be situations beyond your control. But if you develop their capacity to feel like they can keep themselves safe, now they can start to test things. They
Yes.
can start to figure it out. And if you think about, one of the challenges we all face globally right now is a lack of feeling safe. And unfortunately, there's a lot of messaging that amplifies that. So, which is going to directly influence the way you see the world and the responses you have and the choices you make. So, you know, it's an interesting thing.
I like what Jordan Peterson says about that in terms of um, this whole notion of toxic masculinity. He said that uh, young men need to be taught to be dangerous. And the first thing that you hear when you hear someone say they need to be dangerous, that means they need to be confident in any situation. They've got the tools to be able to take care of it. And he said, it's like sending a Spartan into battle without a sword. And there are cases where the sword does not have to come out of the sheath, but knowing how to use it and knowing how to beat the other guy is very powerful in terms of not going through a life of fear.
I have to say, I completely disagreed with him when he said that. Like, completely. It's, and I understood what he was saying, but teach young men to be capable. And then in the right circumstances, when it's appropriate, they'll be dangerous. But teaching them to be dangerous is giving them a sword and then saying, now go flail around and just you'll be okay. Though his framing is, it's not, I
Ken,
don't disagree with his
Ken,
idea. What I
you're not
disagree with is
talking in you're
his
not talking
framing
in
of it.
Jordan Peterson's terms, okay? There was nothing
Oh,
about his
I've heard all of
conversation which was
his, yeah.
no. I mean, go and look up just that one thing. Why the word dangerous? He's very specific as to why to do that.
I know. I know.
No, hang on. Because if you're going to act like you're dangerous, it's much different than being dangerous. But the point is, and it's the same thing that Bruce Lee always used to say, if you know that you're the meanest son of a bitch in the valley, you don't have any fear at all. And that's really all he is saying. And I've listened to hours of what he's talking about, and it's not about flailing. It's about having the capability and not having to use it. And that's exactly how his
I
language.
understand. Yeah, I understand, and I just disagree. I disagree with the way he languages his approach. I think that he's speaking to people from a place of not understanding how they're hearing. I filter
I
everything
got
through a
no
learner
problem
centered
with you
approach.
disagreeing with him. I
So
just got a
yeah,
problem with
yeah.
how you language what you were disagreeing with, because that's not what he said. That's all.
No, I'm languaging it based on what people are hearing. I'm languaging on the conversation that I've
That's
had
fair.
with people who don't have the capacity to hear this guy intellectualize things that aren't in a context that fits into the world we actually live in. So what he's doing is he's delivering a message that is he may be very genuine in his reasons for doing it, but honestly, I think like many of them, he's fallen a little bit in the trap of getting attention and likes and clicks. And the way his message is being heard is not being received the way, and I've actually had to unwind some of what he said in the minds of some teenagers who started having some not positive results in their life because they were trying to follow his message and just not having the capacity to do it. So
Well, I'm just distinguishing for you, and your experience with those kids is valid. It's
oh
completely
yeah,
valid.
yeah.
But what I'm saying to you is, have you ever seen anybody take martial arts and use it to go out and start fights? That's not the
Yeah,
message you're giving
absolutely.
them. So what I'm trying to say to you is and the reason that I brought up Jordan Peterson is because it's along the lines of we don't need for men to become women. What we need is for men to take responsibility for what they are and who they are and what their capacity in life can be. So, along those lines, How do you make sure that someone that we're always going to have people that will lead, take chances, they'll fight when fighting is necessary? How will we have the situation where, like for instance, on the subway last year, where that guy who came back from Afghanistan, this guy was brandishing a knife and going to kill people, and he actually killed him on the subway, and then he went to jail. So that it's not necessarily a good thing to exercise your dangerousness. And that's really what he was saying, to have restraint, but know that it's there. And it's really a message that has to be stewarded, not having kids listen to one 5-minute episode of it, because he gets called on that every single interview. And they always say what you said, which is not what he said. And then he corrects them on it and says, here's what I've actually written. And I think it's beautiful. I think it's great when people get an opportunity to address it, right straight on. And at the same time, it's not a question of being right. It's a question of understanding what's being said. And if you can understand what's being said, you've built something, right?
Well, I guess my only comment to that is if he gets called on it in every interview, maybe you should get more skillful at your message. Maybe you should learn to say it in a way that people can hear it and not feel compelled to challenge in that way. And honestly, I think that he's more interested in the debate at this time and saying things that are going to create that shock and pattern interrupt. And that's fine. I could be totally wrong. I just, it's just
I
interesting.
would
I think
invite
that
you to spend an
there's,
hour of time going and listening to this one episode where he talks about what he's doing.
I've listened to quite a bit of his stuff. I was very intrigued by him when he first kind of hopped onto it. He'd done a lot of work, and it was, but basically, I look at it this way: the more it's not about what he says. I pay attention to the way people respond, and the more deeply polarizing their message becomes, the more skeptical I become of their reasons for creating that environment. You don't have to do that as a teacher if you don't want to, and if you are, I'm not judging. I'm just saying that I'm skeptical. So, and he's one of the ones that I went from listening to a lot, reading his books, even to I'm skeptical now. So, yeah,
Well, the
that's all.
interesting part of that, so where he got in trouble with most people in the world, especially the Brits and the Canadians and everything, was when he took issue with forced speech, which was to have being compelled to use people's pronouns and having it be law. All the rest of it came out of that. He had a podcast for 5 years where all he did was tape his college lectures and then put them up on and the books that he's written, the 12 rules, to succeed in life or whatever it is. Every last bit of what he said was intentionally used the exact word that he needed to use in a world where people change the meaning of word to mean whatever they want it to mean. And he was saying that's not correct. We have to be more specific with that if we want to take responsibility for raising our children and giving them the choice of how they want to behave, as opposed to dictating to them what their behaviors are going to be. I think that's the broad message I got from him. I don't care if I ever convince you or if anyone ever convinced you. I bet you would find enough in what you listen to beyond where you stopped. That's all I'm talking about. You're fine, and I'm not taking issue with anything you've said, except for there's great, good things that are being done. It's similar, in my opinion, to the people standing in that grammar school hall with the boys with the suits and the ties on, where he's inviting boys. And I have 2 grandsons, and I can tell you right now, they're not happy with how they're being raised in the school system. They're basically not being raised to be dangerous. They're basically being told you are not okay as a boy. So it's really emotional for me, and I bet it is for you too. And I'm taking responsibility for that. But I love it when every once in a while when we don't agree.
So funny, I have 4 grandsons, and when Jordan was in middle school, in a tough school system, he started training with me when he was 3, and never, ever did we discuss. He was a gentle soul, sensitive kid. I just taught him to be skillful. And he was at gym. He told me he was in 5th or 6th grade, and they're playing soccer, and he kicked a soccer ball at the same time as another kid, and the other kid went flying and jumped up swinging. And when Jordan is telling me the story, I said, "What happened?" He said, "I just blocked him." And I said, "Well, how did you feel?" He's like, "Well, I mean, he was embarrassed." And I said, "Well, did he hit you?" He said, "No." He said, "Well, did you hit him?" He said, "No, I just kept blocking, and then it hurt his arms, and then he stopped." And that was it. Like, that's dangerous. And with
100%.
no
It's
intention, so yeah.
you get
So, and what I'm saying is that
automatic.
never did I have conversation with him about the importance of him having this dangerous capacity or this violent, never, or even a conversation of what it means to be a man. We would talk about where, like, he had some sensitivities that were more feminine. And then but he's very masculine as far as his physicality. He's a big guy, much bigger than me now, but it was just, and I guess that's what I'm speaking to. Is I think that there are some very intelligent people who abandon nuance in exchange for staking claim on a certain position. And when you do that, you lose the capacity to have truly valuable, like, language. I want to hear him talk about how language evolves and how we navigate that. The fact that, there's a place where the way people self-identify is ever changing. It's different now than it was 20 years ago. Slang words change, all of that changes. So instead of, stomping your fist about what we should or shouldn't accept or what it means, why don't we look at a process that's been going throughout human evolution, and the fact that it's accelerating and there's higher levels of, you know, information and concern. And there's a lot of people who just want to be angry about it and keep you angry about it. So how do we have that conversation and recognize that? So people like him, I'm hearing less of that over time and more, and I could be totally wrong, but just the sense I get is it's becoming entrenched. And I hear it in a lot of people in leadership positions, throughout. So, and to me, it's just unproductive, you know?
Well, and I'll tell you what, we just demonstrated trust and confidence. Okay. You have to trust your experience and what you have learned and understood in the conversations you've had with people that you know. And I have to do the same. But in the meantime, what we ended up doing is you made a tremendous example of what Jordan Peterson is talking about. That you're being dangerous is not something you think about and intend. You just are. Okay. And that, you're talking about, I blocked again. It had to have been so futile for the poor kid who was trying to hit him. And that's the whole point. He didn't have to do anything. All he had to do was, in a really good way, defend himself, hold his ground, and nobody had to talk him into that in the moment. He had that automatically. It just showed up in the moment. And that's what I think. That's what I would like to see in all of our kids. When you think you're dangerous, Ken, as you well know, you ain't. Okay. When you think you're anything, you ain't. Okay. There's always somebody bigger, faster, stronger. And it's the wrong way to go into the world. The right way to go into the world is do your thing. Now what? And as John used to say, I'll mirror what you're doing. I will give it right back to you. But if you come into my space and you attack me, you will get all of me. And I love that because I don't know, what do you think he was? About 150 pounds?
No, he was considerably more than that.
Okay.
You just couldn't tell.
Well, I weighed
he was like
270 pounds at the time he and I were talking, and he was
yeah,
a lot smaller than me,
yeah,
but
no,
it was
he's
never
definitely lighter than that, but
never didn't cross my mind that this is a dangerous man. Not because he said
yeah.
so.
Yeah, no, he was skillful. Actually, the scariest people I've known are always the ones that smile a lot.
Agreed. They know something, don't they?
It's like, yep. That's
So
a
thank
real
you.
one right there.
Exactly. So, for instance, I probably wouldn't stand up and spar with you in the street, but verbally on a podcast all day long, because I know
Sure.
and like and respect you. All right, so we're getting close to the end of the hour, but I don't feel like we've got enough out here. I think that was a really worthwhile place for us to get to. And now I'm wondering, with regard to, well, maybe it is time to just put a cherry on it. And Ken, I would really like to hear if there's kind of two or three foundational statements about what you think might be missing with the folks that aren't lucky enough to work with you. And I mean that sincerely, because I've seen the profound effect that you have on everyone, because they come uh, into your orbit, if you will, and many of them just never leave. And that's not because they're getting something from you. It's because where they are with you is worth coming back to. And I don't know if you've got a couple of things that you'd like to say or give people a thought to have, for a better question, maybe.
Well, I guess if you're to ask anyone that worked with me for more than a few months and you ask what my goal for them was as a teacher, it was always for them to become more accomplished and skillful than I could ever be.
Yeah.
And I think, that mindset is something that was passed on. So rather than holding on to what you've got or, being threatened by someone else as they flourish, you just celebrate it. You genuinely celebrate it. And I had good teachers that really helped me, feel safe in that, so I think that's part of it. And then the other part is just this dynamic balance between, we've had a lot of amazing teams through the years, and it's the combination of being able to be our individual selves while also being respectful of the fact that sometimes we need to be a little less of who we are in service to the group that we're working with. So, we're eagles and pigeons at the same time. there's space for both, and it's just creating the dynamic interaction between the two. So, yeah, I think that's it. So you end up with a place where, sometimes, yes, you could say something and you recognize I have the right to say it, but I want to be gentle with the person that I'm saying it to, or the group of people I'm saying it about, or whatever it is. And just being conscious. Oh, and then the other thing that I've been reflecting on a lot lately is just I think that people could really benefit from understanding how they work as humans, and and understanding how their brain works against them, how their nervous system it's their friend and it's trying to keep them safe, but it hasn't quite caught up to an incredibly advancing world. So, you know, so we're designed for pattern recognition, and you can find patterns in freaking everything now that aren't true. Most of it's not true, but you can believe it and you can confirm it. And our brains are kind of like designed to do that. So I found it helpful to me is remember, is this true, or is this me just being tricked by my own nervous system and brain into believing it's true? And then having a process you can kind of play with questioning it and be okay with what you find out. So
If I do that, I usually call a friend, phone a friend,
Mhm.
and kind of
Yeah.
play it off of them and get into a plus and minus engagement and see whether or not it still makes any sense. And usually the importance or significance of it, and I know you feel the same way, it's not that significant after you've actually languaged it out loud and start taking a good look at it. It's interesting, isn't it?
yeah. Yeah, it's always hard when, we get a lot of identity tied up in, the things we believe or are attracted to, or the things we've done, and that can be difficult to, most of it's illusory and temporary, I mean, we all identified as teenagers at one point. Do we still? you know we probably don't anymore, although I know some adults that still do.
Well, it's been said that the world doesn't demand much more of from us than the social skills of a 12-year-old. So Or Lisa?
Yeah.
Oh no, I was saying at least. I mean, some people don't go, they're even younger than teenagers.
Yeah.
But that's I think like what we've all been talking about. I think I took great comfort and that's why I keep listening to podcasts and studying different things at the human brain. Like we're not responsible for a lot of the ways we think. It's just
Yeah.
natural that it happened to us, that's the neural pathways and all that other stuff. So what has been done can be undone. And I think that's so cool. And then to find all the other things that are happening that happen in our brain that we can help other people and help ourselves. But I just took great comfort knowing that it's not my fault.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how it seems more valuable to be more awake to how we work? Like not
Mhm.
how we think we work, but how we actually work as opposed to what's going on outside of us. There's our awareness of the world around us, but if you start to become aware of just all the ways that we're just kind of flawed and but for good reason a lot of times, but so
Mhm.
it's okay. It's like not your fault. It's who we are.
Yep. My most recent favorite Marcus Aurelius quote was, that I know nothing makes me very powerful.
Mhm.
Jan, any last thoughts?
Now, what you talk about with the nervous system and whatnot, I think about as regard the body. More about how we feel physically and the fact that most people don't even know that. It's
Mhm.
like
Mm.
they don't know how they feel. They don't know what their body is, what messages their body is trying to tell them at any given moment. And to me, if I could empower people in that way, is, you know yourself better than anybody else on a physical level.
But even that too is not our fault, because we've been programmed to not notice it.
That's
You
right.
know?
Oh, yeah,
And so,
absolutely.
100%.
so then
Absolutely.
so
If
then
somebody
people
else
like you that
isn't-
are out there telling people, showing people how to get in touch with their body again and how to feel into it.
That's right. And it isn't anyone's fault. I mean, we've kind of given it away,
Yeah.
and it's taking it back finally and saying, okay, well,
Mhm.
no one really knows me as much as I know myself.
Right.
Yeah, the interesting part of all of that is whatever thought you're having is how it is for you. I mean, it just truly is. You as a being are that thought is correct or it is incorrect or whatever the thought is. And stepping back from it and asking questions, that's where it gets kind of interesting.
Hmm.
The whole notion of an unexamined life not being worth living. So, Lisa, that's why I appreciate who you are. You're out there on the skinny branches all the time.
All right. Sorry guys, my I have another meeting. My appointment is here, so I got to go.
All right. I think we're at time to wrap anyway. And thank you, Ken. And once again, it was wonderful having a conversation with all of you, especially you, Ken, today. When we
We
can
always
get the
have fun.
temperature up and cool it back down, I think that's a good thing.
There you go.
All right. God bless. Have fun.
Bye-bye.
All right. Ladies, thank you. I appreciate it. I didn't say it while Ken was on, and that's my bad, but I love you both very much. And I can't wait for us to do this again. And we are lighting the candle, a world that works. And I'm going to ask you all to do something very special this week. Go and see somebody, someone you haven't seen for a while, and go and see them and let them know that they matter to you and that your world works because they're around. That's all I've got. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.